Her brother was pinching out the chocolate eclair from the pink pastry box when they heard the crash of shattering glass. Sansan's hand slapped over her ears as though compelled by some outside force. The eclair landed on the table with a soft splat. Mui Ah appeared in the kitchen doorway with the cook close behind her. "I'll go check," her brother said, pushing back his chair. "You stay here." Sansan pushed back her chair too. 12 years old to her 9, her brother was constantly forbidding her from going places with him and his friends. Sometimes when he was particularly grumpy, he made her follow several paces behind when they walked home from school. This time, however, she wouldn't let him bully her. She stood and squared her shoulders, and he scowled but said no more. They tiptoed out of the dining room, through the empty drawing room, and stopped before the study. The sliding door had been pulled almost shut, though not all the way. Inside the room, something thudded to the floor. Her brother held his finger over his lips, and Sansan pulled a face. What did he expect her to do? Burst into song? He planted himself before the sliver of space between door and wall, blocking her view. Her nose was running. Her grandma scolded her for always catching cold as if it were something she could control. And she wiped her nostrils on her sleeve so she wouldn't have to sniffle. She tugged on the back pocket of her brother's uniform trouser, and at last, he stepped aside. Sansan held back a gasp. On the opposite end of the room, Grandma knelt before the framed photo of Grandpa on the family altar, her face buried in her hands to muffle her sobs. And then Sansan noticed the shards of glass strewn about the dark walnut floor, the long wooden handle of the hammer partially hidden by Grandma's skirt. Above Grandpa's portrait in the very center of the wall, the chairman's gleaming face continued to preside over the room, smiling benevolently at all who gazed upon him, oblivious to the spiderweb of cracks that scarred him. Sansan's fingers brushed the door handle, and then she pulled back her hand. She turned to her brother, but his face was pale, his eyes clouded with worry. He dragged her back to the dining room. "You're hurting me," she said. When he let go, she saw that his fingertips had left red spots on her skin. She winced dramatically and massaged her forearm. "Sorry," he said quietly. Even though he no longer had to whisper, he leaned in close. "I need you. Please, for once, to listen to me." Sansan stopped rubbing her arm. "You didn't see anything. Neither of us did. Is that clear?" Sansan nodded. "Nothing at all." She nodded again. "We came home from school and they told us Grandma was resting in her room, and we had our afternoon tea as usual." "All right," Sansan said, annoyed. Mui Ah came out with a broom and dustpan. "Does Grandma need help?" In unison, Sansan and her brother shouted, "No!" Mui Ah narrowed her eyes. "Leave her alone," her brother said. "She'll call if she needs help." Mui Ah backed slowly into the kitchen. Her brother took a seat at the table, and Sansan did too, even though she was no longer hungry. He reached for the slightly squashed chocolate eclair, which Mui Ah must have returned to the pastry box, and held it out to Sansan. "You can have this if you want." He never once offered up his eclair, and regardless of her lack of appetite, Sansan wasn't about to turn him down. Before he could change his mind, she bit into the crisp chocolate glazed shell. "Good?" he asked. She nodded and took another bite. "Thanks, Ah Liang," she said with her mouth full. As a small child, she hadn't understood why she was supposed to call him Gore, elder brother, when everyone else in the family used his nickname, and after a while the grown-ups gave up and stopped correcting her. Liam lifted out the pear tart that was their least favorite, which they usually left for their mother to eat when she returned from her residence association meetings. He nibbled at the crust. As much as Sansan relished her eclair's spongy, slightly savory pata choux and creamy custard, her thoughts remained in the study with Grandma. Could the whole thing have been an accident? Could her grandma have been aiming for something else? No. The damage Sansan had seen was purposeful, precise. Grandma must have tottered on her tiny bound feet beneath the weight of the hammer, drawn back her arm until her shoulder strained in its socket, and gathered every ounce of her meager strength to smash the German's sacred face. Sansan pushed the last nub of pastry into her mouth and chewed. "Do you think," she began. "How should I know?" Her brother cut her off. He dropped the mostly uneaten pear tart on his plate and charged to his room. At school, the following day, Comrade Ung wrote the political discussion topic on the blackboard with a stub of chalk. Western goods are not superior to Chinese goods. Liam searched for an appropriate example from his own life. As one of 2 class monitors, he was expected to be a model for his classmates, and the sooner he spoke up, the sooner he could relax. As usual, Ping Ping, the other monitor and the class's sole youth group member, was the first to raise her hand. "None of us needs to be reminded that the bandit Chiang Kai-shek brainwashed the masses into worshipping all things foreign," she said, looking around the room and smiling. Liam hoped she would single him out, but the instant their eyes met, he looked away. Ping Ping continued. "Because of our shameful history, we must be vigilant against our baser instincts." Liam studied her profile. How confidently she uttered those smooth, glossy phrases. How grown up she looked with that elegant gold pin emblazoned with New China's crimson flag on the upper corner of her blouse, unlike the rest of them with their childish young pioneer scars knotted at the throat. "Just the other day," Ping Ping said, "my father ordered our whole family to thaw our Western-made shoes." She stuck her foot in the air to show off a dainty canvas slipper. "Red Stars are the best shoes in the world. They're light and washable. What more could you ask for?" Comrade Ung nodded firmly, the most he ever did to show his approval. The political discussion leader was slender and of average height with flat, unremarkable features. The kind of person whom Liam would have struggled to describe to his friends. But despite Comrade Ung's placid demeanor, everyone knew he tracked participation and scrutinized every word. Liam wiggled his toes in his own red stars and raised his hand. "Comrade Ping Ping is right about the need for us to question our behaviors. For example, my grandma would have continued her old habit of buying French pastries for tea if I had an urge to break free from the bondages of her background and her upbringing." Liam's seatmate, whom everyone called Pimple Face, grunted his assent. Across the room, Ping Ping gave Liam a smile that hid her teeth. He kept talking. "Besides, our local sweets like moji and mooncakes are equally, if not more, delicious. As the chairman states, whoever sides with the revolutionary people in word is only revolutionary in speech. Whoever sides with the revolutionary people in deed, as well as in word, is revolutionary in the full sense." Then and there, he resolved to talk to his grandmother as soon as he found a chance, and to never touch another French pastry. When the session was over, Liam headed for the door with his classmates, but Comrade Ung called his name. Liam took a tentative step toward the discussion leader, who rested his palms on his wooden desk and looked intently at him. There was no way Comrade Ung could know that Liam had made up his entire example, unless he'd spotted Mui Ah hurrying to the baker's and somehow known she was the Ang's house girl. Had something in his words grown false? Why had he gone on and on like that? Why did he have to show off by quoting the chairman? Comrade beckoned him close. I've been watching you these past weeks. Ali swallowed hard. You consistently make thoughtful and interesting points that demonstrate your commitment to the party. Ali relaxed. Thank you, comrade, for your encouragement. Now, Comrade said, your family background is problematic, to say the least, but it's clear you're able to think for yourself. Ali felt his cheeks color. His classmates were from well-off families, but only he had a father who was an overseas Chinese in Hong Kong. Only he lived in Diamond Villa at the very top of tranquil seas, although the bottom 2 stories had been requisitioned by the party and leased to the tenants, their servants' quarters converted into the people's maternity clinic. Ali wasn't sure if he should thank the discussion leader for the backhanded compliment or apologize for his family. Before he could decide which, Comrade reached into a desk drawer and withdrew a sheet of paper, pale yellow and tissue thin. Ali breath caught him in his throat. It was an application for the Youth League. I don't hand this out lightly, Comrade said. You know as well as I that joining the Youth League is the first step toward full party membership. Ali nodded, unable to speak. He'd coveted that gold pin ever since he'd seen a team of tall, strapping boys from the senior middle school sweeping the streets by the marketplace while they sang Red May in robust baritones. Standing before the boys, Ali had taken in the appreciative, admiring faces of the passing townsfolk, all except for his mother, who in her typically bourgeois way yanked his arm, saying, "What a waste of time! Don't they have sweepers for that?" Comrade handed over the sheet of paper. Turn this in as soon as you can. Ali took the long route home, grateful that, for once, Sansan wasn't tagging along. With the whole family crammed into the top floor of the villa, along with the servants, he never had a moment to himself. But he knew it was wrong to complain, even if only in his head, when everything his family had amassed had been at the expense of the proletariat. Now that his uncles and aunts and cousins had left for Taiwan and the Philippines, it was only fair that all those spare rooms be returned to the people. At the intersection, instead of turning homeward, he continued on to Eternal Peace Road, which led to the edge of Drumwave Islets, away from the din of town. Years earlier, on his very first day of school, Ali had learned that in ancient times, large hollow rocks had lined the stretch of craggy coastline down below. When the high tides pounded the rocks, ghostly drumbeats soared through the air, frightening the early settlers who would give the tiny 2-square-kilometer islet its name. Of course, the reef had long since disintegrated, which encapsulated all Ali hated about being a child. Everything magical and exciting seemed to have happened in the past, before he was born, or would happen in the future, after he was an adult. Nothing ever seemed to happen now. Leaning over as far as he could without losing his balance, he watched the waves lap at the shore like the tongues of kittens, playful, harmless, meek. A few hundred meters away, across the channel, the dense, towering buildings of the city of Xiamen glittered beneath the late afternoon sun. At that very moment, he imagined brand new multi-level dormitories rising into the sky, railroads unfolding across the land, swarms of people in buses and on bicycles hurrying to wherever they need to go play their roles in the construction of New China. Motor vehicles weren't even permitted on sleepy drumwave islets. Teams of laborers lugged wooden carts up steep lanes, as those stuck in an earlier time. Ali best bet was to keep up his marks, qualify for the Youth League, and earn a place in Xiamen University. Then, finally, could he cross the channel and join in on the action? He wondered if Comrade Ung had invited others to apply for the youth league, or if he and Ping Ping would be their class's sole members. A smattering of raindrops tapped the crown of his head, and he peered into the sunlit sky. A knot of dark clouds gathered in the east, prompting him to hurry home and show himself with his application. Aliam was an exemplary student, class monitored 3 years in a row, top marks in math and science, captain of the football team. Still, his application had to make up for his family's former wealth, his father's job, and even his mother's missionary school education. Pen poised over paper. Aliam let himself imagine what would happen if the party had learned of his grandmother's crime. His family was already under surveillance. Inspectors were routinely dispatched to the villa. Neighbors and friends of his mother who questioned them about Pa's work in Hong Kong and when he would return to help rebuild the fatherland. The inspectors were friendly, even apologetic, and Aliam didn't believe his family to be in serious trouble. No doubt his confession would change that, but perhaps he'd been wrong to hide what Grandma had done. Perhaps a little fear was precisely the push she needed to leave the past behind and change her ways. For how would she learn her lesson if she faced no punishment? 5 years earlier, when Aliam's last two cousins had moved away, he begged his mother to let him go with them, but of course she said no. Loneliness and boredom drove him to befriend the son of the assistant cook. The boy was a full head taller than he, and whenever they teamed up to play football against Aliam's neighborhood friends, they always won. One day, while Aliam and his new friend were practicing drills in the courtyard, Grandma summoned him inside. "That boy should be helping out in the kitchen, but he can't if he spends all his time playing with you." The injustice of it all crashed down on Aliam. His friend was also 8 years old. Why didn't he go to school? Why did he wear Aliam's old clothes that were clearly too small for him? Why should he have to work in the kitchen with the adults? Grandma's eyes lengthened into slits. "Because that's his fate," she said. "Just as it is your fate to study hard so you can follow in the footsteps of your grandfather and father and bring prosperity to the family." Everything Aliam had learned at school fell into place. He finally understood why the chairman had declared, "Communism is a hammer that we use to crush the enemy." Suddenly, Aliam saw the enemy all around him. It was the enemy who barred the servants from entering through the villa's front door and reduced men to beggars who slunk around the marketplace back before the party had rounded him up for rehabilitation and caused his classmates to make fun of Pimpleface, his seatmate, whose mother was a widow and whose uniform was threadbare and ill-fitting. Aliam knew he should take a hammer to his grandmother's callousness, but at that moment, he didn't dare. Instead, he let a few days pass and then returned to playing in the courtyard with his friend. Shortly after that, Grandma fired his friend's mother. She claimed that the cook was no longer needed now that so few of the family remained. Aliam had cried and raged and kicked his door hard enough to crack the wood, but of course, that changed nothing. Watching from his bedroom window as his friend and the assistant cook straggled down the street with meager knapsacks on their backs, Aliam vowed never again to stay silent in the face of the enemy. Since then, his baser instincts, wasn't that Ping Ping's sophisticated term, had wiped out the memory of that vow, driving him to swear himself and his sister to secrecy about what Grandma had done. Now, however, this application presented an opportunity to reaffirm his dedication to the party and make things right. He lowered his pen, and a stillness settled over him. The acceptance that what he was about to do could never be undone He wrote, Chairman Mao teaches that those who confess will be treated less harshly than those who refuse to admit their wrongdoings. He went on to detail the horrific manner in which his grandmother had insulted the great helmsman and why he had no choice but to expose her crime. He didn't stop writing until he completed the entire application. When he finally raised his head, his hand and forearm ached. He was dizzy and famished. He walked through the dining room to the kitchen, where the sight of his grandmother made him freeze. He hadn't expected to be up and about. Leaning on her cane to shift the weight off her bound feet, she stabbed a finger in the pot on the stove and brought it to her lips. No taste, she said. Add more vinegar, more soy sauce, more everything. This was his grandmother's refrain. Ma said her taste buds had grown numb with old age. Grandma turned to Liam. I saved you the eclair, she said, pointing to the dining room. Liam made himself say, I'm not hungry. If you say so, Grandma said, returning her attention to cook. Liam went back to his desk and reread his application. Perhaps this line was too dismissive. That one too harsh. Perhaps he could tell Comrade Ung that he accidentally dropped his application in the spring by his house and request a fresh one. From the kitchen, Grandma's strident voice rose. Are you deaf? I said more vinegar! More! Did she have to scold Cook? A man with more white hairs on his head than black, as though he were a naughty child. If Liam didn't hammer the enemy now, who knew what other crimes his grandmother would go on to commit? He smoothed the application between the pages of an exercise book so it wouldn't get rumpled as a satchel. Closing his eyes, he pictured himself with his fellow Youth League members on National Day. Arranged from shortest to tallest, they would parade through the town center in pairs, waving their red flags in high in the air and singing March of the Volunteers. The townsfolk lining the road beamed at them with pride and affection. The gold pins on the breastbone glinted in the sunlight. He and Pinkman were almost the same height. There was a good chance they could pair together.